This movie starts with a bang. We meet Thomas, a guy who wakes up in a super strange secret elevator. He's totally lost and has no idea where he is or how he got there. When the elevator opens, there's a whole bunch of guys standing around him. They look kind of tough, and Thomas is pretty sure he's in trouble. He tries to make a run for it, but he's clumsy and ends up falling face first into the grass. It's like a cartoon character, ha! He realizes he's trapped, surrounded by huge stone walls in a place called the Glade. It's like a giant prison, and all these guys have no memory of their past. They live pretty simple lives, growing food and doing chores. The leader, Albie, explains the deal. He tells Thomas that the Glade is only for guys, and a secret elevator delivers a new guy every month. And guess what? This month's delivery is Thomas. He's confused because he has no idea why he's here. Albie also explains that everyone in the Glade is like Thomas. They have no memories except their own names. They're all trapped, and they don't know how they got there. Okay, so Albie gives Thomas the big warning. Don't even think about going near the maze. The maze is behind those huge stone walls, and Thomas is super curious. He's the kind of guy who, when you tell him not to do something, he wants to do it even more. Especially after he sees some guys running out of the maze, totally alive. Thomas ignores Albie's warning and tries to sneak into the maze. But he gets stopped by a guy named Gally, who gives him a big ol' push. Thomas is furious. What gives you the right to do that? He yells, I'm not a barbarian. I use words, not my fists. But then things get scary. The wall behind them starts to move, closing the entrance to the maze. Thomas is totally surprised. Newt, one of the guys in the Glade, explains to Thomas that the maze is only open during the day. At night, it changes, and dangerous creatures roam around. Only the runners, the guys who go into the maze every day, are allowed to be there. And even they have to get back before dark, because no one who stays in the maze overnight has ever lived to tell the tale. So Gally's little push was actually a way to save Thomas. Thomas gets that the maze is super dangerous, but he also starts to think it's the only way out of the Glade. That means he's going to be stuck there for a while. Newt tries to cheer him up. Don't worry too much, he says. The runners have been stuck in here for 3 years, and maybe someday we'll figure out a way to escape. It's hard for Thomas to stay positive. He's stuck in this crazy place, and he doesn't know how to get out. The next day, while they're working in the garden, Thomas talks to Newt about escaping. What about climbing the walls with vines? He asks. Or maybe we could sneak back into that elevator. Newt shakes his head. We've tried all that stuff already, buddy. Let's just focus on doing what we're supposed to do. For now. He hands Thomas a basket and tells him to go gather fertilizer in the forest. Thomas heads off into the forest, searching for the best fertilizer. He stumbles upon some human bones, and then, suddenly, a guy pops out from behind a tree. He's a runner named Ben, and he's acting really weird. As soon as Thomas tries to say hello, Ben attacks him. He starts yelling, I saw everything. It was all your fault. He's completely out of control and tries to hurt Thomas. Thomas has no time to think, he just runs. Luckily, the other Gladers find him before Ben can catch him. Albie, an old hand at this, knows right away that Ben is in trouble. Something's off about him. When Albie lifts Ben's shirt, he sees the bite, a nasty mark from the monster in the maze. It's not just any bite, though. This one carries a virus that messes with your mind, turning you into a zombie who attacks everyone while trying to protect others. Ben is basically a walking time bomb. The only way to stop the spread is to get Ben back in the maze, where he'll probably die. That night, Thomas has a weird dream. He's strapped down in a lab with a girl, surrounded by scientists he doesn't recognize. This woman keeps repeating something, but he can't quite make it out. It's a bit creepy. When he wakes up, Thomas sees Albie and Minho following Ben's trail into the maze. But then, bam! A storm hits, and everyone's worried. The sun goes down, and they still haven't come back. It's getting dark, and the entrance to the maze is closed. Just as things look bad, Minho shows up, dragging Albie, who's injured. They can't reach the closing gate in time. The darkness falls, and they're trapped. Everyone's heartbroken, especially when they realize Albie and Minho, their leaders, are gone. Then Thomas, being the brave guy he is, decides to go into the maze to help. Minho is shocked, like, are you crazy? You're going to get yourself killed. But Thomas is determined. The air is thick with danger, and it's getting dark fast. Minho wants to leave Albie behind, thinking that they have a better chance of surviving. But Thomas comes up with a plan. They'll tie Albie up with vines and hoist him up so he's out of harm's way. Just when they're about to make their escape, Minho lets go of the rope and runs. The Griever, the monster, is right there, ready to attack. Thomas ducks into the vines, heart pounding. As the monstrous Griever shuffles past, he quickly tightens the knot holding Albie. He has to make sure Albie stays safe before he can even think about escaping. As soon as he's sure Albie is secure, he takes off running, but crunch. He steps in something disgusting. Just then, the Grievers drops from the sky. It's terrifying, like a giant spider, but with creepy mechanical legs. It's clear someone built this thing. Thomas has to use his quick reflexes and a little bit of luck to avoid getting caught by the Grievers. The maze is about to close, and he knows he's running out of time. In a desperate move, he uses the closing entrance as a trap, squeezing the Grievers between the closing walls. And just like that, the three of them make it out of the maze, alive. The Gladers can't believe their eyes. It's the first time anyone has ever survived a night in the maze. Albie is injured and confused. He's been infected with the virus and is starting to lose his mind. They're happy he's alive, but they know he needs help. It's a huge victory, but it's also a reminder that the maze is incredibly dangerous. Now that Thomas is back, the Gladers start to celebrate his incredible bravery. But Gally isn't happy. He's furious that Thomas destroyed the peace they had with the Grievers, and he thinks Thomas should be punished. Minho steps in to defend Thomas, saying that he's a hero, and Newt, the second in command, makes Thomas a runner, allowing him to enter the maze during the day. While everyone is talking, the elevator arrives, bringing a new Glader. But this time, it's a girl. It's the first girl to ever come to the Glade. The Gladers are confused. The girl is named Teresa, and she has no memory of her past. She's scared and confused, but when she wakes up, she calls out Thomas's name. He doesn't remember her, but there's something about her that feels familiar. The Gladers start to realize that the Glade is more than just a prison. There are bigger secrets to uncover, and their connection to this place is more complicated than they thought. Thomas decides it's time to get to the bottom of the maze, so he leads Minho and the others back into it. They follow the same path they took before, and they find the body of a Grievers. Next to it, they find a device that's beeping and flashing. It reads, Wicked Earth Departure Disaster Site. They start calling it Wicked for short. It's weird, because they remember seeing those same words on the elevator that brought them to the Glade. Thomas is sure that this device will lead them to a way out of the maze. He thinks that Wicked created the Grievers, and maybe the device will give them some clues. But Minho isn't so optimistic. He shows Thomas a model of the maze that he's made over the past 3 years. We've been running through this place for years, he says. We've explored every corner, and there's no way out. Minho explains that the maze is divided into 8 sections, and they open and close on a specific schedule. Each section is only open for a certain day. Thomas looks back at the device. It says 7, which means it could be related to the 7th section of the maze. Maybe we should try exploring section 7? He suggests. Just then, 2 Gladers rush over to tell them that Teresa, the girl who arrived in the elevator, is acting strange. She's not herself. She's standing on a platform, holding a knife, and she seems to be scared of all the guys. Thomas, who is the only one she seems to recognize, goes up to the platform to talk to her. He tries to calm her down, explaining that losing her memory is normal and that she shouldn't be afraid. Teresa calms down a little and tells Thomas her name. She explains that ever since she woke up, she's been having the same dream over and over. Thomas realizes that it's the same dream he's been having too. He remembers the girl from his dream, and now he knows it wasn't just a dream. It was a real memory. Then, Teresa pulls out 2 vials filled with a mysterious liquid. They're labeled Wicked. Thomas is excited. Albie has been badly injured, and he's worried that Albie might not make it. He grabs a vial and injects it into Albie. It seems to work. Albie stops screaming and goes back to sleep. The next day, Thomas and Minho decide to go back into the maze. They use the device to help guide them, and they find a strange circular area with some Griever slime. Suddenly, a red laser beam scans over them. The maze seems to recognize that they're not Grievers and closes the exit behind them. It also activates a bunch of traps, trying to crush them. They manage to escape by running as fast as they can, but they realize that this circular area might be the key to escaping the maze. They think that if the Grievers can get into the maze from there, then maybe they can get out too. Gally disagrees. He's afraid that there are even more Grievers on the other side of the exit. Before they can debate any longer, Albie wakes up, and he seems to have regained his memories. He remembers Thomas from before the Glade. The whole experiment was about you, Thomas, Albie says. He looks sad and heartbroken. All of us, we're here because of you. Thomas is confused. This isn't the first time someone has blamed him. Another Glader who was infected with the virus said the same thing. Before he can figure out what's going on, something else happens. The maze doesn't close that night. Strange sounds echo through the glade. The Grievers are coming, and they're coming from everywhere. A terrifying massacre begins. The Gladers run for their lives. Albie gets taken away by the Grievers, and the attack wipes out half the glade's population. Gally punches Thomas and accuses him of being the cause of all this. Thomas realizes he needs to find out the truth. He decides to try to recover his memories the way Albie did, by getting infected with the virus. He intentionally stabs himself with a Griever's stinger. It's crazy. He's practically trying to kill himself. Luckily, Teresa still has one vial of the wicked liquid. The Gladers use it to save Thomas. As Thomas is recovering, he starts to remember things. He tells the others that he and Teresa were both working for Wicked, the organization that created the maze. The Gladers were subjects in their experiment, and Wicked had been watching and testing them for years. He can't remember why Wicked is doing this, but he knows it's not good. At the same time, Gally takes over the glade. He's been against Thomas's reckless actions, and he wants to follow the rules and keep the Gladers safe. He decides to sacrifice Thomas and Teresa to the Grievers. But Minho, Newt, and the rest of the Gladers won't let that happen. They want to escape the glade, and they want to find out what's really going on. They join Thomas and Teresa, and they all head into the maze. They're basically revolting against Gally. He warns them not to cause trouble, but Thomas tells him that the glade isn't home. It's a cage. He wants to get out, and he wants to find the truth. They make their way through the maze, battling Grievers and trying to figure out the exit. When they kill a Grievers, they find a device, and they realize it's a sensor. The maze has 8 sections, and the sections open and close on a daily schedule. They have to figure out the code to open the exit. Just as they think they've cracked the code, a Grievers attacks, killing Minho. Then, a member of the Glade risks his life to save Minho, allowing Teresa to unlock the exit. The exit opens, but the rock above it collapses, killing all the Grievers that were chasing them. They've made it out of the maze, but the battle isn't over yet. The survivors keep moving forward. They find a room filled with dead bodies. It's clear they were all shot. Thomas realizes something. This is the lab from my dream, he says. This is the heart of the maze. He finds a control panel and uses his fingerprint to unlock it. A video appears, and a woman's face fills the screen. It's Ava, the woman from his dream. This is what we show the survivors after they lose their memories, Ava says. The truth behind the maze is revealed. The world has been devastated by a giant solar flare. Millions of people died, and the survivors are facing famine and a deadly virus that attacks the brain. They call it the flare. The only people who haven't been infected are babies. These children are the hope for humanity. Wicked has been experimenting on these immune children. They put them in harsh environments, like the maze, and observe how their brains work. They want to find a cure for the flare, but the experiments are slow and brutal. Some of the scientists at Wicked think their methods are wrong. They rebel and kill the other scientists. Ava finishes her message and shoots herself. The truth is revealed, and the final door to the maze slowly opens. Just as the Gladers are about to escape, Gally appears, holding a gun. He looks like he's been bitten by a Grievers, and he's completely crazy. He tells the Gladers to stay in the maze, and he aims his gun at Thomas. Minho grabs his spear and throws it at Gally, saving Thomas. Gally falls to the ground, but before anyone can celebrate, the youngest Glader falls. He took a bullet for Thomas. Before he died, the young Glader gave Thomas a carving of himself, and asked him to give it to his parents if he ever found them. He doesn't remember his parents, of course, but everyone has parents, even if they can't remember them. This was his way of showing that he still had hope for a life outside the glade. Thomas wailed in grief, but before he could even mourn his friend properly, a group of masked men stormed in. It was the resistance group that Ava had mentioned in her video. They were ruthless, dragging everyone away and forcing them into a helicopter. Meanwhile, back at Wicked headquarters, Ava, who supposedly shot herself, suddenly appeared. She was faking it. The whole thing was part of her plan. She informed the remaining scientists. Phase 1 of the experiment was a huge success. We had more survivors than we expected, she says. And Thomas. He's perfect. She's thrilled with the results of their tests, and she's eager for Phase 2 to begin. The helicopter flew over a ruined city called Donut. Hidden in the wasteland was a massive new maze. The Gladers were free from the first maze, but their nightmare was far from over. The helicopter landed, and the Gladers were forced out. After the disaster struck, the world was plunged into darkness. A mother, pushing through a crowd, desperately hands Thomas over to the scientists, hoping they'll protect him and keep him safe. Thomas looks around the crowded vehicle and sees other children just like him. As Ava appears, fear overwhelms him, and he wakes up with a start. He's back in the reality he thought he'd escaped from. The Gladers are attacked by wicked soldiers. Thomas and his friends are captured and taken to a safe haven by helicopter. The man in charge is named Jansen. He explains that this group rescues kids from Wicked's experiments and gives them a safe place to live. They keep the kids safe from cranks, the infected who are now violent and aggressive. The safe haven is a paradise for the Gladers. They can finally eat, sleep, and relax. They are safe for now, but they are told they will be moved to a new location soon. They get a quick medical checkup and are left alone. It turns out that there are many moving mazes, and the Gladers are just some of the few who escaped. Most kids rescued only stay for a day or two. There's a strange guy in the corner named Eris, who escaped a maze filled with girls. He's definitely got some good luck on his side. It's mealtime, and the daily selection for new homes takes place. The Gladers are happy to be chosen, but Eris is terrified of being selected. Thomas notices that Teresa is being taken away for tests. He's worried about her. Thomas notices that Teresa is taken away alone for some tests, and he worries about her. At night, Eris sneaks into Thomas's room through the ventilation system. He takes Thomas to a restricted area, where they see a doctor pushing a man into a medical lab. It seems like a normal procedure, but Eris watches the man go in and never come out. He's suspicious. What in the world are they doing? Thomas thinks. He has to find out what's really going on in this place. The next day, during mealtime, Thomas tries to follow the Gladers as they are. Selected and sent to Scott, but he gets caught by a guard. It's weird because Thomas isn't usually this reckless. He's like a totally different person now. He fights back against the guard, and as a result, everyone is confined to their quarters. Back in his room, Thomas shows the others the badge he stole from the guard. He tells them about how the safe haven is not safe at all, and he says they have to escape. Then, he and Eris sneak back into the ventilation system and head to the medical lab. The first thing they see is a bunch of pods filled with Griever's embryos. They keep going, and they discover something even more shocking. The people who were sent to Scott are all here. They're hooked up to machines, bleeding, and have tubes stuck in their bodies. It looks like they're being drained of something. Just as they are about to get caught, Jansen walks into the lab with another person. Thomas and Eris hide behind a pillar and overhear a shocking conversation. Ava is still alive. She's ordered Jansen to speed up the experiment. The Ryarm, a rebel group, has destroyed 2 of Wicked's bases, and they need to get ahead of them. Thomas realizes that something is terribly wrong. He races back to the safe haven and tells everyone what he heard. He urges them to run. As Jansen arrives, Thomas and the others climb out of the ventilation system, taking a doctor hostage. Guards start shooting at them, but Jansen orders them to capture them alive. A strong Glader takes down a guard and grabs his gun. They find Teresa and make their escape. Jansen is right behind them, leading his troops in pursuit. Luckily, a locked door slows them down, giving Thomas and the others a chance to get ahead. Jansen catches up to them and tries to talk some sense into Thomas. "Don't rush out there, kid," he warns. "You're going to be cranked if you're not careful." Crankers are people who have been infected by the flare and turned into mindless zombies. But Thomas is stubborn and doesn't believe him. "I'm not going to sit here and wait to get eaten," he shouts. He fires his gun, grabs his friends, and runs. Eris, ever the clever one, unlocks the next door, buying them some time. They finally reach the outside world. It's a wasteland, covered in ruins and ash. It's almost like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. To avoid getting captured, they hide in an abandoned market. They decide to find Ava and Jansen and try to reason with them. They've also heard rumors about the Ryarm, a group of rebels fighting against Wicked. The old saying is true, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." If the Ryarm is attacking Wicked, maybe they can join forces. But first, they need to gather some supplies. It's dark, and they have to use flashlights to see where they're going. They finally find a light switch, but when the lights come on, they wake up a Cranker who was sleeping in the shadows. He attacks, and one of the Gladers gets scratched. The others scramble to hide in the ruins. It's clear that the world is a dangerous place, and they need to be careful. The next day, they start trekking across the wasteland, a vast, desolate city. The harsh environment takes its toll, and one of their friends collapses. They carry him on a stretcher, pushing forward. During a break, Teresa tells Thomas that she's recovered all her memories. She wants to convince him to go back to Wicked. The truth is much more complicated than you think. She says, "We need to get back to Wicked." Thomas is about to ask her more questions. But then Winston, one of the Gladers, starts to have a reaction. He doesn't want to hurt anyone, so he begs Thomas to shoot him. No one can bring themselves to do it. Newt hands Winston the gun, and he takes his own life. It turns out that not everyone who is immune to the flare is truly immune. They might still be susceptible to the virus. It's a terrifying realization. They continue their journey, crossing the desert. One night, Thomas wakes up and sees a city in the distance. He's amazed. But as they're making their way to the city, a huge storm hits. Lightning strikes, and Minho gets hit. He's lucky to survive. They seek shelter in an abandoned factory, but they're not safe. Cranks, chained up inside the factory, break free and attack. Just when they think they're doomed, a young Cranker girl steps forward and leads them to safety. She and the other Cranks live in a secret community inside the factory. She's the adopted daughter of George, the leader of the group. George is a tough guy. He looks at Thomas and his group and says, "What are you doing out here? Where are you going?" Thomas tells George that they're from Wicked and that they're searching for the Rye Arm. George is happy to hear that they're from Wicked. He's heard that the Rye Arm has been taking in immune kids from Wicked. He has a plan. He wants to use Thomas and the others to get into the Rye Arm's base. If we can get in there, he says, then we won't have to hide out here anymore. He thinks this is their chance to escape and live a normal life. But it's not as easy as he thought. One of George's men betrays him for money. He secretly contacts Wicked and tells them where the Cranks are hiding. Jansen arrives with a large force of Wicked soldiers. It's chaos. Brenda shows up just in time and knocks out the traitor before he can do any more damage. She saves Thomas and the others, but they're still in danger. As they try to escape, Wicked soldiers open fire. They're trapped. Just when it seems like all hope is lost, George's old bomb detonates. The explosion decimates Wicked's forces, and the factory starts to crumble. Thomas and Brenda are trapped and have to find a way out. The only escape route is through the sewers. It's dark and damp, and the sewers are crawling with rats. The Cranks have been down here for a long time, and they're hungry. They look like shadows, ready to attack. Thomas and Brenda run into a group of Cranks and are chased to a dead end. They climb up onto a pile of rubble, trying to get away. In the chaos, Brenda slips and falls, hitting her head on a shard of glass. It's about to break, and she's going to be seriously hurt. Thomas carefully approaches her and tries to help. But just as he reaches her, a Cranker attacks. Brenda falls. In a moment of panic, Thomas grabs a piece of broken glass and kills the Cranker, saving Brenda. They've escaped the sewers, but Brenda's been bitten. Thomas quickly bandages her wound, and they head to the bar that George arranged for them to meet at. The bar owner has some strange rules. They have to drink a green drink to be allowed inside. The drink tastes awful, and Thomas starts to hallucinate. He's disoriented and confused, and he mistakes Brenda for Teresa and kisses her. Then, he passes out. In his dream, he remembers being in a lab with Teresa. He tries to warn her. Don't believe anything they say. They're all part of the experiment. But Jansen suddenly appears and pulls him away. He wakes up with the start. The first face he sees is Teresa's. The other Gladers are there too. George is in the middle of beating up the bar owner. He thought the owner was their connection to the Rye Arm, but he's figured out that the bar owner is a double agent. He's been helping Wicked by giving the immune kids, like Thomas, drugs, and then selling them to the scientists. George is fuming. He kicks the bar owner again, and finally, the bar owner gives them the location of the Rye Arm. The Gladers, with a renewed sense of purpose, head out to find them. They're almost there when they're ambushed by two young women, Harriet and Sonia. Just as the Gladers prepare to fight, Eris says, "Hey, I know you." It turns out that Harriet and Sonia were in the maze with him. They know where the Rye Arm is, and they offer to help. With Harriet and Sonia's guidance, the Gladers find Finn, the leader of the Rye Arm, but Brenda collapses. Finn immediately recognizes the signs of a Cranker bite. She needs to be put down, he says, reaching for his gun. But Mary Cooper, a doctor at the Rye Arm base, stops him. She takes some of Thomas's blood, saying it might be able to create a temporary cure for Brenda. Mary was a scientist at Wicked, and she recognizes Thomas. She reveals that Thomas was actually a spy for Wicked. He infiltrated the experiment and gave them information. Mary remembers her time at Wicked. They were trying to find a cure for the flare, and they discovered that immune children have a special enzyme in their brains. They thought if they could isolate the enzyme, they could create a powerful medicine to stop the flare. The cure only slows down the flare, though. It's not a permanent solution. Those who are infected still need regular doses of the cure. And the worst part is that the enzyme can't be made. They can only get it from the blood of immune people. That's why Wicked has been using the immune children as lab rats. The Rhyarm believes that the kids have a right to live. They believe in freedom, so they're fighting against Wicked's experiments. After hearing Mary's story, Thomas's memories start coming back. It all starts to make sense. They give Brenda some of Thomas's blood, and she starts to recover. Things seem to be getting better. But then, Teresa walks to the edge of a cliff and looks out at the wasteland. She seems very sad and unhappy. Thomas goes to comfort her. She explains that she remembers her past too. Her mother died from the flare, and ever since, finding a cure has been her only goal. She confesses that she contacted Wicked. She believes that Wicked is trying to save the world, but she thinks that if all the immune children are hidden with the Rhyarm, then there will never be a cure. She believes that the immune kids deserve to live, but what about the people who are infected? Do they not deserve a cure? Because of her betrayal, Wicked has attacked the Rhyarm's base. All the immune children, including Minho, Aris, and Sonia, have been captured. Thomas had a chance to escape, but he turned around to try to save them. He's willing to risk his life to save others. Ava arrives by helicopter and tries to convince Thomas to give up. She tells him that the Rhyarm is not as righteous as they claim to be. She says that Wicked is only trying to find a cure for the flare. She argues that Wicked's methods may be cruel, but they're the most effective. What has the Rhyarm done? She asks. They're just waving a flag of freedom and causing more trouble. Meanwhile, Mary, who wants to expose the truth about Wicked, tries to stand up to Ava, but Ava shoots her. Thomas is enraged. He pulls out a bomb he's been carrying and threatens to use it if they don't stop the experiment. The situation is tense. Just then, George arrives in a truck. Many of the captured immune children escape in the chaos, and the Rhyarm launches a counterattack. There's a fierce battle. Wicked captures the remaining immune children, including Minho, Aris, and Sonia. The Gladers can only watch helplessly as the door to the base closes, trapping Minho, Aris, and Sonia inside. The next morning, Finn leads the survivors in cleaning up the battlefield. He tells them that he'll take them to a safe place. But Thomas isn't going with them. He's determined to rescue Minho. He wants to stop Ava and her brutal experiments, even if it means going alone. The other Gladers are inspired by Thomas's courage and decide to join him. They're going to launch a final attack on Wicked. They spend 6 months planning their attack. They finally find the Wicked train that's transporting the immune children. They plan a massive train heist. George and Brenda attack from the side to distract the guards. Thomas and Newt attack from the back, planting a bomb at a junction. They successfully take control of the last 5 train cars, which are carrying the immune kids. Meanwhile, George and Brenda manage to lure the guards into a trap, and then they all escape with the train, leaving the guards behind. It's an epic scene, like something out of a movie. But they have a problem. Minho is not on the train. Wicked must have realized how important Minho is to Thomas, so they moved him to a different location. The rescued children give them a new clue. The train is headed for a city, but there are no cities left. The whole world is a wasteland. The only city left is the Wicked headquarters. Thomas immediately starts planning a new rescue mission. If everything goes well, he says, we can go back in a week. But Newt isn't on board. Our priority is to get the rescued kids to the island. He says, we can't put everyone in danger just because of Minho. He adds, we stole a whole train from Wicked. We can't just sit here and wait for them to come after us. Just as he's finished speaking, a Wicked helicopter appears nearby. They manage to turn off the lights and the train's power fast enough to avoid detection. Thomas has to admit that Newt has a point. But he can't just sit there and do nothing while his friend is in trouble. He decides to go after Minho alone. But his friends won't let him go alone. They prepare a vehicle and wait to set off. They're not exactly expert drivers, though, and they crash in a deserted tunnel after a Cranker attack. Luckily, Brenda and George arrive just in time. Let's go take a look at this legendary city. George says, it's time to stop these cranks. Wicked has built a massive wall around this last city. It's practically impenetrable, and the walls are armed with heavy weapons. No one is allowed to enter without permission. Outside the city, refugees are protesting and demanding to be let in. It's hard to live in constant fear of Cranker attacks. They want to be safe inside the city. Thomas and the others are stuck outside, trying to find a way in. But Wicked drones spot the tracking chip on Thomas's neck and Jansen orders the drones to fire on them. The city is in a state of crisis. The number of people infected with the flare is increasing every day. Ava, the head of Wicked, is responsible for developing a cure. They've isolated the strongest antibody from Minho's blood, but it will take time to create a cure. But Wicked sponsors want results now. They say that it would be better to build more safe zones, like the last city, to protect the healthy people. They don't want to invest their money in a cure. Teresa is furious. She points out that the number of infected people has tripled the number of healthy people. Building safe zones is only a temporary solution. They can't defeat the virus by hiding. If they stop the research now, all the sacrifices made will have been for nothing. Teresa's passionate speech calms the chaos, but the truth is, they're running out of time. Meanwhile, even though Thomas and the others weren't hurt by the Wicked drone attack, they are captured by a group of masked rebels while they're trying to escape. The leader of the rebel group is Gali. He was stabbed in the chest by Minho after he killed the young Glader, so it's a huge surprise to see him alive. Thomas is furious when he sees Gali. He lunges at him and punches him. Newt pulls them apart and says, Gali was infected and lost his mind. He didn't know what he was doing. But Thomas is confused. Gali was a Glader. How did he end up here? He's not here to hurt us. He wants to work with us. You want to get into the last city, right? Well, I know a secret entrance. After everyone calms down, Gali takes them to meet the leader of the rebels, Lauren. Lauren was the one who saved Gali after he was infected. It's clear that he's been infected for a while. The flare has ravaged his face, and one side of his body is disfigured, covered in a rough, bark-like skin. To prevent the virus from spreading further, he has to carry a vial of the cure with him all the time. Thomas has an idea. He can negotiate with Lauren for the cure, which is the one thing they need right now. Lauren doesn't hesitate. She agrees to help Thomas get into the last city. I know a way in, she says. It's a secret passage through the sewers. With a deal struck, Gali leads Thomas and the others through the tunnels. The city is just like it was before the flare, but something feels off. The skyscrapers still shine with lights, but the streets are deserted, especially during curfew. Jansen is already on high alert because of Thomas and the others. The Wicked headquarters is heavily guarded. There are security scanners on every floor, and cameras are everywhere. It's like an impenetrable fortress. After scouting out the area, Gali concludes that they need to take Teresa hostage. Some of the Gladers are hesitant. Teresa betrayed them, and Thomas definitely isn't happy about it. He can't forgive her, but he still cares about her. Teresa has been given the strongest cure that Wicked could make, the one derived from Minho's blood, but it's not working. The virus is still spreading, and it's getting worse. Ava realizes that the virus is starting to spread through the air. If they don't do something soon, everyone in the city will be infected within a month. Jansen isn't worried. We'll just take the immune kids to a different base, he says. But Ava pushes back. What if we run out of immune children, and we still don't have a cure? She asks. Maybe this is just how it's supposed to be. We need to let nature take its course. Let's focus on protecting the immune children, and let's hope the next generation is immune. The situation is getting more dangerous. More and more people are getting infected, even those who weren't supposed to be infected. Thomas is forced to put his feelings for Teresa aside. He needs to save his friends. He'll use Teresa to get into Wicked headquarters. He lures Teresa to a secluded spot and takes her hostage. They plan to use her as leverage to sneak into the building and rescue Minho. Teresa struggles with her decision. She wants to find a cure, even if it means sacrificing some people, but she's also a scientist. Minho's blood isn't working anymore, and he's no longer useful for the research. But she wants to help. She removes the tracking chips from the Gladers' necks, helping them avoid detection. She notices that Brenda has been bitten by a cranker, but is still okay. She questions Brenda, and Brenda explains that she got one dose of the cure months ago, while she was still at the Ryarm base. Drive? Mary had created the cure using Thomas's blood. Teresa, who was skeptical about the cure, is hopeful. She suggests that Thomas go to Wicked and convince them to let him test a cure on them, but he doesn't trust her anymore. She takes a bandage with Thomas's blood and leaves. To get past the heavily guarded Wicked headquarters, Neil and Gali disguise themselves as Wicked guards and escort Teresa inside. They use Teresa's knowledge of the building to disable security cameras and cut wires. They access Wicked's main computer system and find the cells where the immune children are being held. They rescue the children, but Minho isn't among them. Teresa checks the computer system and discovers that Minho was moved to the medical wing on the other side of the building. They split into two teams. Gally stays behind with the rescued children to find the cure, while Thomas, Neil, and Teresa go to find Minho. They are about to get to the medical wing when they encounter Jansen in an elevator. Thomas and Neil are disguised as wicked guards, so Jansen doesn't recognize them. Teresa is freaking out. Just as they step out of the elevator, Jansen realizes something is wrong. Jansen gets suspicious and heads toward them with his gun drawn. Teresa quickly traps Thomas and Neil inside a glass room, giving them cover to escape to the upper floors. Meanwhile, Minho is in a tight spot too. But even in this worst-case scenario, he manages to take down the doctor and get free. Neil and Thomas join Minho, and the three friends are reunited. But their reunion is short-lived. They're quickly cornered by guards and trapped in a room. Just as Jansen breaks down the door, they decide to jump out the window into the pool on the floor below. It's a simple plan, but it works. But they're not out of the woods yet. 4 guards have been watching them. As they think they're about to be captured, one of the guards turns on his buddies and shoots them. It turns out that the fake guard is Gally. He'd left Brenda and the other kids with the cure and came back to help them. Brenda has become the most amazing bus driver. She's forced to flee with the immune kids to avoid being captured. They escape the guards, but the gate to the city is heavily guarded, and it seems impossible to get out. But Brenda has a backup plan. She's a skilled driver, and she uses a modified truck to launch the entire bus over the wall. It lands perfectly outside the wall, and everyone on board is safe. She's amazing. Meanwhile, Lauren gathers the rebels outside the city and rallies them to attack the last city. She launches a risky attack, blowing a hole in the city wall. At the same time, Wicked Headquarters is hit by a cyber attack, disabling their defenses. The rebels take advantage of this opportunity and storm the Wicked Headquarters. The last city is suddenly engulfed in a fierce battle. Thomas and the others are trapped in the middle of the fighting. They try to find a safe place to hide, but then Newt's condition worsens. His lips turn black, and he starts convulsing. He hands Thomas his necklace and says goodbye. Thomas can't bear to leave his friend. He begs Minho and Gally to find Brenda and get the cure. But before they can, Newt collapses. Suddenly, Teresa's voice crackles through the radio. She tells Thomas that he can save Newt if he goes back to Wicked Headquarters. She explains that she's been experimenting with the blood from the bandage Thomas gave her. She's discovered something incredible. The virus in Thomas's blood doesn't just slow down the flare, it can actually fight back against it. It means that Thomas's blood can cure people. He's the only one who can save humanity. Thomas is still trying to process the fact that he might be able to save humanity when Newt, driven mad by the virus, attacks him. In a moment of clarity, Newt begs Thomas to end his suffering. "Please, just kill me," he cries. But the madness returns, and he attacks Thomas again. Then he grabs a gun, ready to take his own life. Thomas tries to stop him, saying, "Don't do this. There's still a chance to be cured." But Newt is out of control. He grabs a knife and lunges at Thomas. Thomas can't bring himself to hurt his friend, so he just tries to hold on. He knows he has to keep going until Brenda gets the cure. Newt, using the last of his sanity, stabs himself in the heart. He has no other choice. Thomas is heartbroken. He's lost another close friend. He's overwhelmed with grief. He goes back to the Wicked Headquarters to find Ava and asks her if his blood can really save the world. He pleads with her to spare the other immune children. Ava confirms that his blood has the power to cure the flare. As Thomas lowers his gun, Jansen appears and shoots Ava. Then he knocks Thomas out and takes him to the lab. Jansen wants the cure for himself. He's ambitious. He wants to rule the world. But he's infected, so he needs to be cured first. Jansen is infected too. After he takes Thomas's blood, he forces Teresa to create a cure. She manages to make 1 vial. As Jansen prepares to inject himself with the cure, Teresa attacks him from behind. It's been her life's dream to find a cure and save humanity, but she can't stand Jansen's greed and ambition. He's twisted and power-hungry. She frees Thomas and they run. Jansen shoots Thomas in the stomach, but they manage to escape into a lab filled with grievers. Jansen is still on their trail. When Teresa is caught, she offers to give Jansen the last vial of the cure, begging him to spare Thomas. But Jansen isn't merciful. He threatens to kill Teresa if Thomas doesn't give up. Thomas, even though he's badly hurt, stands up and grabs something to hit Jansen. But it doesn't work. "You messed up, kid," Jansen says, laughing. As he finishes his sentence, the glass walls of the lab break, and the grievers rush at him. Jansen is quickly overpowered by the grievers, and he dies. Teresa, with Thomas injured and bleeding, makes their way to the top floor of the building. She gives Thomas the last vial of the cure. Just as they're about to escape, George and the other Gladers spot them from a helicopter. But the building is engulfed in flames, making it impossible for the helicopter to get close. Teresa, desperately trying to save Thomas, manages to get him on board, but she stays behind. The building collapses as the helicopter flies away. When Thomas wakes up, he finds himself at the safe haven on the island. It's simple, but it's safe, and the flare isn't a threat here. If it weren't for the bullet wound in his stomach, he'd think he was still dreaming. They've finally reached their paradise. They can rebuild their lives here, and they'll never forget the friends who sacrificed themselves for their freedom. That's the end of the movie. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.